went into just
We
not
start
being
the
able to
first series in the second half. We have a penalty. I thought we were better with the penalties, but the minus plays put us behind the chains. I felt like we were third and long too much. And the part that I'm frustrated with myself is that we became one-dimensional, and I know better. So I have to be more patient relative to how we run the ball, and it was that type of game.
And here we are back again for another post-game edition of the Not Another Bucking podcast. We come to you after Denver's latest loss, a 31-21 setback to the New York Jets in Week 5. The Broncos dropped to 1-4 overall, and they have now lost all 3 of their home games despite having a halftime lead in each of those 3 games. The teams that they have lost to, the Raiders, the Commanders, and now the Jets, have a combined record this season of that's 3-6 for the AFC opponents. You add in the 2-3 record for the Commanders, and that brings you to 5-9. So 0-3 at home against teams that are collectively 5-9 this season. And as we get going here, I'm Nick Kosmider, host of the podcast alongside producer Kaz, joining us again tonight, post game as usual. And Matt, I think the thing that stood out to me in this game was, there's nothing 5 weeks into the season that the Broncos can hang their hat on at this point. Something that they can week in and week out be able to depend on in a positive light. That is, there's certainly some things that we have come to expect in a negative fashion from these Broncos, i.e. allowing teams to absolutely gut you on the ground, fizzling on your opening drive of the third quarter despite getting it every single time to start the second half. Like those are the negatives we've come to count on. But there's nothing that this team puts forth like on a week-to-week basis that you say, because they do this, they're going to give themselves a good chance. And it's 5 weeks now, and they have not been able to identify that thing. There's no consistent running game. There's no, consistent package of plays that you just know are going to hit every single time. There's been nothing that they can hang their hat on and say, this is our identity. And I think that 5 weeks into the season, to me, Matt, has been the biggest failure of the Sean Payton era to this point, that they have not been able to build anything that they can call their own as a football team. And what that leads to is just week in and week out where you're grasping at straws when Sunday arrives. Sean Payton's known for his preparation, that they've prepared. I think they prepared reasonably well. The opening scripts are great, but that's such a small portion of the game. And again, they just have not been able to count on anything week in and week out. And this is where it leaves them.
Yeah. And I mean, the opening scripts can be great, but if before your offense touches the ball, you've already muffed a punt and given up points, then, just giving away extra possessions that really don't need to happen is just never going to be a recipe for success. I felt like the offense at times did enough in the first half. They had moments, they put up some points. Jaleel McLaughlin again is looking, when he gets the ball and is decisive in his cuts, he looks fantastic. They got away from the running game a little bit today, like we heard Sean Payton talking about, but there have been glimpses, but like you said, they just haven't been able to put together 4 full quarters of football. We see glimpses of it, but until you can put it out there for 4 full quarters, you're going to continue to look like you did today against the New York Jets, which is not anything that anybody in that organization is going to be proud of.
Yeah, and at this point, the Broncos have they're tied for the worst record in the AFC. They would lose that tiebreaker to the Raiders, of course, because win it if it's a battle for draft positioning that we're already talking about here on October 8th. So Raiders play tomorrow night. So they're just 1-3. So Broncos, you're 1-4. Patriots are 1-4. So either way, they're at the bottom of the conference. They're one of only a handful of 1-4 teams. There's a fair amount. The Cardinals, the Bears, the Giants. Panthers, of course, are 0-5. But anyway, you cut it right now. They are one of the worst teams in the NFL. And look, we didn't expect Sean Payton to come and turn this into a juggernaut overnight. And I think, I predicted them to go 8-9, to miss the playoffs. once again, but certainly seeing some of those things that you want to be building toward. But we just haven't seen it, and part of that is, look, this is a roster that has been part of the second longest playoff drought in the NFL behind the Jets. So we knew that this team simply hasn't been good enough because they haven't had the results, right? No matter what they do at the coaching level, they haven't had enough. And so certainly you were going to see some of the exodus of players. They turned over the roster a good deal in the offseason. They've continued to turn it over as the season has begun by cutting, or trading Randy Gregory, things of that nature. But again, the thing to me that has been surprising is just the lack of identity. And you talk about it. Yeah, offensively, they did do some good things, but they get down into the red zone. Twice they reached the Jets' 5-yard line. And this is sort of where Peyton's, his sort of preparation, his execution of play calling in that space of the field is supposed to kind of help set you apart. And instead, the play calling there was really funky. They're throwing these wide receiver screens on the edge. Like you went and paid $82 million so that you could be a physical running team. And Samaje Perine, I think, touches the ball once in those 7 snaps they took inside the 10-yard line on those 2 drives. So to me, it was just kind of play calling that didn't fit. And you score 6 points when you have a chance to score 14 and really kind of like put them down early. And they blew those opportunities. They were actually lucky to be up 13-8 at halftime because the Jets are deep into Broncos territory. They're trying to score a touchdown, but at least get a field goal. They end up throwing the ball in bounds, not having time to spike the ball. So that they miss a chance to get points right at the end of the half. But the Broncos just did not capitalize on enough of their opportunities. And I got a stat for you, Matt. They ran their first 16 plays. They ran 16 plays in the second half before they finally picked up a first down. Those 16 plays amassed a total of minus 19 net yards. That was over the course of 6 drives. The first four drives ended in 3 and outs. The other drive ended in a 2-play and fumble opportunity. What, from you, like watching the game from home, from your perspective, how did this team just be so lifeless for the first 6 drives of this second half?
I mean, it all really does start up front. When you saw them in the first half and they were actually moving the football, Jaleel McLaughlin's 5 yards down the field before he makes contact with anybody. They're getting a good push up front. They're getting open running lanes and then turning that into the play action pass. That is what this team does well. When you can establish that run, then good things happen, because otherwise all that's going to happen is that the team sit back, they cover the wide receivers, they give you the dink and dunk routes if they can come up and make the tackle, and then it's just, can your line block the front pass rush? And the answer today overwhelmingly was not really. They gave up 4 sacks again, and they were lucky that it was only 4 sacks. Russell Wilson was running around like a madman the entire day and never seemed to have his feet set in the pocket today. And one of the things that we've kind of applauded him for over the last few weeks has been that he was getting the ball out of his hands quickly. Even if it was those checks downs to the running backs, the short passes to the wide receivers and tight ends, we will take those in this offense. We'll take the 4 or 5 yards, the forward momentum, the sacks, the holding onto the ball in the end zone for like 4 seconds before like a half-ass throwing away. Like those are negative like plays in this offense. Like this offense isn't designed to make up for. Like if you have an offense like the Dolphins, you can have a 3rd and 15 and be like, yeah, we got a shot. Like the Broncos aren't the kind of team that's going to regularly convert a 3rd and 15, a 3rd and 12. Like that's not what this offense is designed to do. And it's not what you want them to be doing. You need to have those negative plays are just absolutely horrendous for this offense.
Yeah, they really are. They're not built to dig out of any kind of hole. And that's where Sean Payton sort of chided himself today, because he said, I know what this team is if we're one-dimensional. And it's not, that's true of every team, but you're right. It's especially true of this team. And it's, again, like, I think there's been encouraging things from Russell Wilson. He has some core competencies that allow you to do things offensively if you're using him in the right way. And we've seen that for a good chunk of this season. But again, it's like, when it comes to having to sort of make plays without the benefit of just like, that run game, that script kind of opening things up, He save for the fourth quarter against the Bears, he's just not been able to kind of lift them, and he did not get a lot of help today. You mentioned it, like their interior was. I mean, that Jets front is really good. As Mike McGlinchey was saying in the locker room to us afterwards, like the way that they rotate guys in and out, and essentially everybody they bring in is kind of like hellish in the way that they get off the ball. It's a real challenge, but it made it all the more, I think, frustrating if you're watching them as an offense that they weren't sort of acknowledging the fact that they needed to, establish the run, do things to keep their quarterback a little bit more protected. And they just got away from it so quickly. Like that was the thing that was staggering. They immediately start playing like they're chasing 2 or 3 scores. Like even after they go 3 and out, they have a 5-point lead. They go 3 and out. Bryce Hall hits for a 72-yard run, which we'll talk about in a second. And so now you're down 15-13. Well, you go, so you're only down 2, but they get into this mode. They get a holding on first down on the next drive. They're chasing it again, and you punt. They go down and score a field goal. Now you're down 18-13. Broncos get a break. The Jets fumble their punt. The Broncos take over at the Jets 39-yard line. They're only down 5 in prime position to go score a touchdown and take the lead. And they fumble the ball on an end around play that just really kind of looked clunky from the start. It just felt so mismatched, the game plan today. And it's the middle of the field. You're early in the down. You try to take a shot or whatever the case might be. But yeah, poor execution, poor game planning, and it just got them.
Yeah, and to kind of contrast that with what the Jets were doing, the second to last drive in the first half, the Jets come out. They ran the ball 9 straight times for 67 yards. Yeah. And the Broncos just had no answer. Like it wasn't until they started throwing the ball again that they finally got to stop and held them to a field goal.
Yeah.
And then in the second,
third and long in the red zone, so they kind of had to throw. And then,
right. At some point you got to throw, but that's when, they're finally able to make a stop. But like, if you establish McLaughlin as consistently hitting on these big runs, like he had, 4 carries of greater than 15 yards today, 3 or 4. And it was, and yet then they just basically completely ignore him in the second half. They don't get him the ball out in space on any kind of screen passes that then once they're into that throwing down, they seem to want to move to Samaje Perine for more pass protection because they were getting absolutely blown up. And then Samaje Perine just whiffs on a couple of big blocks in a row, including the one where Russell Wilson ultimately gets strip sacked and returned for a touchdown. There were a couple just completely missed blocks there that just really put the offense in a hole, and it was not impressive.
Yeah. And so the Jets did run the ball. And one of the things that had stuck out to me in the preparation for this week was when Justin Simmons was talking about, like, this was what teams do. When they find a weakness, they're going to continue to hit that bruise over and over again. And so they knew going into this game that, Breece Hall is a really great running back, and he was like no longer on this restriction that they had kind of kept on him since he was coming back from that ACL injury that he suffered coincidentally in Denver last year, right after he had another one of these long touchdown runs against the Broncos. But they had seen a team that gave up obviously 350 rushing yards to the Dolphins in week 3, 171 rushing yards to the Bears in week 4. Even going back to the Commanders game in week 2, they gave 122 rushing yards. So knew that it was going to be a point of emphasis. And Matt, I'm just having a hard time understanding why every single time these teams run this outside zone against the Broncos, they're out of gap. They're not in the right gap. On the Hall 72-yard run, there was not a single player within range to touch him. What is it? Is that defensive lineman getting pushed off the ball? Is it linebackers running to the wrong hole? Like why are teams being able to so easily gut what the Broncos are doing right now?
A big part of it starts with that interior line. Again, I mentioned it earlier. It all kind of starts up front. And for as great of a start as Nick Benito got off to in the front line, he got 2 sacks in the first quarter, drew another holding penalty that would have been a 3rd sack coming off of a 2.5 sack game last week. There were a couple of plays where he clearly was a little overcommitted to the rush, it looked like. And that on, like, specifically on that outside zone, you have to be able to set that edge as the outside presence there. And when you're consistently getting beat off that edge, that's kind of where it starts, is that outside linebacker position in their base defense. And it's easy to say that, they're going to, that it, it's just us missing our gaps. It's, the defense isn't quite playing up to it. But at some point, it has to be that somebody just has to make a play. You have to be in the right position, and somebody has to get to kind of, grip it and be like, you know what? No, we need to step up. We need to hit this hole hard. There has been almost no tackling by the secondary. It seemed like, anytime that you're out in space, the secondary, I don't know. It hasn't been impressive at all, the tackling. So, I think that it starts with that outside line, starts with the guys on the outside linebackers, the interior defensive line, and then the secondary coming up and making tackles so that it's not 72 yards without getting touched.
Yeah.
In the worst case scenario.
To your point, it certainly hurt them that they did not have DJ Jones in the second half. He suffered an injury toward the end of the second quarter. Because he had a play early on, like they were impressive the first couple drives. Like DJ Jones shed a block, and I think the first play of the game and tackles Breece Hall for a loss. So they were prepared for what was coming. But once it's and this happens, you see it. But once the momentum started going New York's way, you start to have confidence as an offensive line. And to your point about the 9 rushes on that drive in the first half, like you just start having it's like fun for this offensive line. I've talked to linemen about this before. Like when you get to play that way, it's like the best. That's what you want to do as an offensive lineman. You don't want to sit there and like be on your heels and have some guy that's 260 runs a 4.3 like, and you got to try to keep him from being an athletic freak. Like nobody really wants to do that. They want to run block. And so
especially when you have a line that's been beat up, and the Jets offensive line took a couple licks today during the line and had to switch some bodies around, but being able to commit to the run and not have to put those guys back on their heels blocking and pass protection definitely served them well, given the injuries up front.
Well, especially, I mean, they know what the deal is with Zach Wilson, right? Like he's got talent. Like he can run. I think that's like one thing that underrated about him a little bit is he's able to like take the ball down and run. He's athletic. He can avoid the rush. He's got a big arm, as we all know. But it's just the certain things like the decisions you don't need. Like you have no reason to be trying to challenge Pat Surtain in the red zone when you're protecting a 3-point lead with about 2.5 minutes to go. Like it's just unnecessary. And, luckily for him, that didn't cost them the game because the Broncos end up getting to about midfield. And then, as we mentioned, Russell Wilson gets sacked, fumbles the ball. It just, I don't know. The total for the Broncos allowed on the ground through 5 games is 938 yards rushing. That's the most by a team through 5 games in the NFL since the Jets gave up 954 way back in 2002. So this is like the worst rushing defense start in 2 decades. There's plenty of other defensive markers that you look at and say that this has been a historically poor defense to this point in the year. And look, Matt, I don't know that they're going to make a move coaching wise, because again, Vance Joseph and what's going on there, it's not all on him. And players have come to his defense. They've said that. They said, listen, like we look at the tape, it's guys making the wrong plays. It's us missing tackles. But again, it's part of the business. And the Broncos are 1-4. Again, they've lost all 3 games at home. At a certain point, you take a really hard look at everything and say, look, this might just not be working. It's not going to obviously happen this week. The Broncos have 3 days of rest before they have to go face the defending champion Chiefs. But I mean, Matt, like, is there any, like, what, when you watch this, like, is there anything to cling to hope wise for the Broncos at this point?
I mean, honestly, at this point, you start clinging to what are our young players doing well? What are we developing guys into to do well down the road? And you see guys like Jaleel McLaughlin playing really well in the backfield. You see guys like Nick Benito playing really well on the edge and pass rush. Marvin, not necessarily the best game to take a look at Marvin Mims. He didn't have the best day today. But you do have, and like that, I think is what, when you see things like that, it reminds you just when you build through the draft and you hit on some of these players, that is when teams can really start to capitalize on a lot of this. Like the adding players through veteran or through free agency has to be like you're fixing that one hole, fixing this one glaring need we bring in a free agent to fix. You have to build through the draft in this league to have a chance to be consistent. And with as much draft capital as this team's traded away in the last couple of years, that's been nearly impossible for them to do. So you look at what this team has on the roster, you think about how this could look 2 years or next year, maybe the year after that, with a couple years in the Sean Payton offense, you start to take that solace. I got a question for you though, Nick. I know that we've talked that this is not, I don't think, a Russell Wilson. It's not solely Russell Wilson's responsibility that the team's not playing well, but at the same time, you're not winning games with Russell Wilson. And if at some point, if you're not going to be able to win with Russell, you have to find out whether or not you have something in Jarrett Stidham that you're going to look for down the road. How long do you think they make it playing like this? Because you look, they play the Chiefs next 2 weeks. They have the Packers in between. So maybe best case scenario, you go into the bye at 2-6, maybe 3-5 if you steal the Chiefs, but realistically 1-7 or 2-6. How long is that leash for Russell?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I look at it though is the biggest thing that they're going to have to sort of figure out is whether they think that Russell Wilson is a viable option for them for a couple more seasons after this one. Because again, we've talked about this. We've talked about the kind of the guarantee date for his 2025 contract is on the 5th day of the next league year. So next March, they have to then decide, hey, we are going to pick, he's going to be on the roster. So he's going to have that $37 million guaranteed in 2025. So it's not just about saying, hey, we're going to go back with this for another, for another year as we kind of sort of build up somebody young and then see. You sort of have to make that 2025 decision. Now, I will say this: they could pick that up. They could guarantee that portion of the contract and then just go through 2024 and then still cut him. Maybe do a post June 1 designation over the 25 season, the 26 season. So it's not an end all to say like, hey, if they let him be on the roster in 2024, he's going to be their quarterback all the way through the end of 2025. That's not necessarily the case, but that, again, that trigger there is something to keep an eye on. And so I think, that being said, I think they still want to, I think, get enough information about him, because choosing to move on from him is such a huge organizational decision in terms of the finances, the pinch. You have to have a deep understanding of what it's going to do, salary cap wise, what you're going to be able to afford and not afford over the seasons to follow if you make that decision at quarterback. And then also, obviously, what is your plan at the quarterback position going forward? Because as bad as the Broncos are right now, I mentioned it a few minutes ago, like the list of teams that are in that 1-4, whatever range, it's heavy. So are you going to get the number 1 overall pick? And if you're number 2, what can you afford to give up to go get a quarterback that makes it all worth it? So it's such a complex, nuanced decision to have to be made. And, obviously you hit the thing there. It's like, you pay this guy, you gave up this draft capital, and whether it's his fault or not, you're not winning games. And so sooner or later, they will have to make the decision to say, as much as it's financial, we have to move on to the next thing. We have to reset the organization at this point, which obviously moving on from a contract like that is an organizational reset. And what that would ultimately maybe finally allow them to do after this 7-8 years of wandering since winning Super Bowl 50 is no longer being able to run from the reality that you are at a hard reset, that you are in a hard rebuild. Because for too long, this team has pretended that it's not, and or refused to embrace one, and that's what gets you these results where they sort of teetered on mediocrity, 6-10, 6-11, whatever the case might be. In 2021, got as close as they've been to competing. They were 7-6, had Cincinnati at home, had a chance to win that, but ever since then, it's gone straight downhill, and they're still having all these expensive players on their roster, all these veterans who have done nothing here but lose. And again, it's not a personal knock on saying it's anybody's one fault, but at a certain point, you have all these players who just have never been a part of success here, and you have to take a good hard look at all of it. Bottom line, I don't think a Russell Wilson benching or something of that nature would come anytime soon. If you're wanting to see Jarrett Stidham and you're thinking you might make that decision in the offseason, I think that would come the last couple weeks of the season, depending on everybody's health. But Again, they need to see just whether Russell Wilson could be a part of what they're trying to do. But there's a lot of decisions to be made.
Yeah, absolutely.
So. But anyway, I think that's a good place to leave it. I think the thing that we'll talk about when we come back here, middle of the week, we'll preview the Chiefs game, obviously, which is Thursday night. Obviously the big question there is can they end this 15-game losing streak against the Chiefs? I don't think that they've gone into one of these Chiefs matchup with sort of less like pop juice optimism for that matchup, which maybe that's the thing, right? The Chiefs are just kind of like doing their thing where they're not really, they're not really humming on all cylinders, and yet here they are at 4-1.
But they're running the ball well.
They're running the ball well, and that's about all it will take against the Broncos. For most teams, it seems like it's going to be hard to envision something for Denver to be able to kind of do anything to stop that offense. But we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it all, and also get into what we're looking at with this trade deadline, because I think the Russell Wilson decision is one that's going to be kicked down the road a little bit, but they're going to have to make some decisions, and probably already are, on a couple players on this roster in terms of deciding whether or not they want to move them, get some of this draft capital back that they need to have to start building through this draft. You look at Jerry Jeudy as probably the player on the roster with the most value, non-Patrick Surtain edition, that they could potentially dangle in a trade, second rounder, third rounder, whatever the case might be. I mean, Judy is the team's best wide receiver, but it's another situation where it's like he's the best wide receiver, but we're 1-4, so and he's got that fifth year option next year that they already picked up, but by trading him, you would get off of that salary for next year. So there's just a lot to think about, and we'll get into that all next week. Matt, any more prevailing thoughts from this one?
Just that I agree that October 31st is that trade deadline, and I think that's going to be the next time that Broncos fans have something to be real excited about.
We'll see how it goes. Obviously, the Broncos have traded a star in each of the last two trade deadlines. It was Von Miller in 2021. It was Bradley Chubb last year. They traded a guy they thought was going to be a star for them, and Randy Gregory certainly never turned out that way. But he now gets to play for a contender, so I think he's the big winner of the week here in Bronco land. But we'll get into it all again next week. But in the meantime, thank you guys for for listening this morning, and we will be back soon. Take care.